Welcome to episode 35 of the Sports Geek podcast. On today's episode, we chat with Dan Pinney from the Melbourne Storm about the Melbourne Storm's recent Twitter handle change and look back at the SB night. And why the hell is this podcast so late?
Welcome to the Sports Geek podcast, the podcast built for the sports digital marketer. And now, here's your host who's reading your tweets right now, Sean Callanan.
Thanks, DJ Joel. My name is Sean Callanan from Sports Geek. You can send me a tweet on either of those handles, at Sean Callanan or at Sports Geek. Thank you for doing so. Really appreciate the feedback that we're getting, both on Twitter, LinkedIn, Google Plus even, and also Facebook, facebook.com/sportsgeek. On this episode, we have a chat to Dan Pinney from the Melbourne Storm on halftime, and also I'm going to have a look back at a very successful SB night at Honey Bar and go through some of the questions that were that I was asked throughout the night and answer them here. I'm going to have a bit of a Q&A section. I'll keep this episode short and sweet because it is late. Apologies for that. I am aiming to get the Sports Geek podcast out every Friday, Australian time. And unfortunately, this week has been one of a technological nightmare with a website getting hacked that I had to fix. And then on top of that, I decided to spill water on my MacBook Air, which is now relatively useless. So I'm now currently working on a completely new MacBook with a completely new GarageBand. So apologies for its lateness, and I hope I can get all the sound and levels right using the new fangled GarageBand 10. So first of all, here is my segment on halftime with Daniel Harford and special guest from the Melbourne Storm, Dan Pinney.
Sean Callanan, our sports digital media guru for SportsGeekHQ.com.
He's with us again at a big night last night, SB nights, hashtag big night last night.
Yeah, the sports business night went quite well. Had a good representation of the sports biz community in Melbourne down at the Honey Bar at South Melbourne. So look forward to having another one later in the year.
Did you have the Melbourne Storm there? Because they've gone to world first category.
They have. When we're talking about sport and legends in sport, when you're a one-namer, you know you're up there. You know, LeBron, Tiger, Buddy. When you're
Yes.
one, everyone knows you by the one name,
Sure,
and to us, yeah, exactly. And it's the same way from a Twitter point of view. And last night, the Storm swapped over their handle. They have been known as at Melbourne Storm.
Yep.
They haven't done anything ridiculous. They haven't changed to a love symbol like Prince or anything. They've just gone down to just Storm.
Right.
So
At Storm.
so they're now at Storm. So they join the leagues of at Lakers, Celtics, Red Sox, Warriors, all these teams that just have their moniker as their Twitter handle. And we've got Dan Pinney, digital media manager from the Storm, on the line from down at Amy Park.
Dan, good afternoon.
G'day, guys. Thanks for having me.
Pleasure. Thanks for being on the show. Why did you do this, Dan?
Oh, we just wanted to give people an extra 9 characters to tweet us half. It was a bit easier. They can fit in there.
And to
It's not
allay
as silly as it sounds,
you get another 9, and to allay any fears, because there was a bit of Twitter chatter, there was a bit of conspiracy theorists, late at night, tinfoil hat type of stuff. It was, oh my God, the Storm are leaving Melbourne because we've dropped the Melbourne from the name. It's like, no, we can allay those fears right now. The Storm are staying in Melbourne, and so much so, the other thing that they've done, which is the world first, so that the name is not one thing. The new jersey they're going to have for the Auckland Nines, they're going to have the their Twitter name, their Twitter handle at Storm on the front of the jersey.
Yeah, it's great. It's actually one of the first in the world that we can put it on that really big prominent property on the front of the jersey.
Have you seen Twitter being a really good way for the Melbourne Storm brand to expand and get a lot more intimate with the followers?
Oh, yeah, it's massive for us, and it's great for our brand in Melbourne as well, and to push, obviously the Storm brand. That's why we went down to just our moniker. But it's such an intimate platform, and you can really directly communicate with with each other one-on-one via Twitter. So yeah, it's been great for us.
Is it a chance with the Auckland Nines being a new concept in rugby league to try a few things and see what sort of response you get?
Yeah, it is. Yeah, and that's why we've put at Storm on the front of the jersey. Social's been a bit of a focus for us during the pre-season and during the trials. And we'll have a major sponsor on there for the home and away season.
Yep.
But that's sort of our focus during the season and leading up to the season. Obviously get that brand out there and get the season underway and start selling some tickets for the home and away season, of course.
And the important thing is, just from you and I are both on Twitter, and so is Dan at Dan Pinney. Give him a follow, everybody. Is that Twitter is still still sort of, I don't call it minor leagues, but still smaller than, if we're looking at Facebook. So there's 12 million people on Facebook, and there's over 250,000 people that like the Storm, but they're at 45,000 or around about that from a Twitter followers point of view. So there are still a stack of people that are still haven't jumped on board with Twitter. So, so what this does is it helps amplify to everyone that, one, the Storm are very serious about Twitter and it provides that insider access. But what we want more people on it, because the more people are on it, the better the conversation.
Yeah.
If you've been watching the tennis and those kind of things, the Stanimal was trending last night at the end of the 5-setter. So I think, getting the Twitter avatars or the handles on the jerseys and on the field and those kind of things helps convert people to say, I'm going to sign up. And so I will follow my footy team and develop a bit of a connection with Storm.
Yeah.
And so that's what it offers for you, doesn't it, Dan?
Yeah, absolutely. It's a great, like I said, it's a really intimate sort of platform, and we love the fans on there, and they love us. We've got our certain little voice on our, I guess, the way that we communicate with fans, with different teams and different personalities and pop culture. So it's a really good fun channel, actually. But yeah, it really assists us in the marketing stuff that we're trying to do in Melbourne as well.
Well, it's a great initiative, Dan. Hope it goes really well in the Auckland Nines and the Storm fans and the supporters that don't follow you on Twitter. Get around you at Storm. Well done to you. Sean,
Thanks,
well
guys.
done to you.
Thanks, Huff.
World first, world exclusive here on Halftime. We can't get enough of that. Check out sportsgeekhq.com for a whole lot.
Sign up for Sports Geek News at sportsgeekhq.com/sign up now.
So what do you think? Is it worthwhile changing the Twitter handle to the one-name handle? For mine, I think it's a good move. It's great when you can, in a tweet, just mention your team. So I think there'll be a lot more mentions of the Storm. I don't think it'll be that much different in the sense that they were Melbourne Storm. Previously, they were Melbourne Storm RLC. So again, it's been a transition for the Storm, and a few teams have done that, sort of trimmed down their Twitter handle to be closer aligned to their brand and closer aligned to the trademarks that they have. If you can nab that handle, I suggest you do so. Simply contact Twitter and say you want the handle. I think the other thing is just that the fact that Twitter still needs more followers. Just on the numbers, both in Australia and around the world, just that they're still trailing Facebook for numbers. So there's always opportunities to tell Facebook fans specifically why they should be on Twitter. And it is a different platform. It's a conversational platform. It does take a little bit of learning. I think Twitter have improved in their first user experience. I think they're focused a little bit too much on celebrities and celebrity news for mine. But if, as a sports team, you want to train your fans to be following your handle, and I'm sure more Storm fans will sign up and follow at Storm as a result. So the SB night was very successful. We had about 60 people at the Honey Bar last Tuesday, and from a wide range of sports and from a wide range of disciplines. It was marketing people, that kind of thing. I did have a second interview planned for this podcast, and as I said, it hasn't been the best week. It got cancelled on Thursday, so I'm going to fill a little bit of that time, not too long, but with a bit of a Q&A section, and just answer some of the questions that were asked during SB night, and also the ones that were asked of me, of people from the night. So one of them was from a few of the younger attendees coming from recent graduates or trying to break into the sports business industry, And it is a question I get a lot of, how do I break into the sports business? And for mine, it is a very hard business to break into. I was able to do it, and I can sort of share a little bit of a story of how I was able to do it with Sports Geek. It was a bit of right timing and right skill set at the time. For the people who don't know, if you haven't heard the Sports Geek origin story, it's not available on Netflix yet. For 15 years, I was a geek. I was a IT developer. Worked on web systems, desktop systems, multitude of industries, retail, big business, utilities, and I finished up working with a startup as my last job. But at the same time, I was always dabbling in the world of sport. So I did some TV work with the Western Bulldogs way back in 1998. I'll even share a link to the YouTube clip in the show notes. I did a basketball show for the NBL around that time as well, and also did some data analysis with the Mountain West, who we spoke to, Dan Butterley, on the podcast previously. If you want to link to, I'll leave a link to that show when Dan talks about how the Mountain West Conference got started. But sort of take you back 4 or 5 years ago now, 2010. I pretty much started by using all the platforms. And initially when I started Sports Geek, I thought I was going to be an IT web developer, consultant, and I guess guide the sports market through what I saw as a real treacherous path of IT and web development. As someone who worked in IT for a long time, I knew there was a lot of cowboys in the industry, and by that, not offending anyone in the south of the states or in Texas and those kind of things. But when I talk about cowboys in the IT industry, shonky operators is probably another way of putting it. People that would build a website for a sports team, but they really didn't have the background of knowing what sports teams, how they operate, and then also not having a good understanding of the sports fan. So you would get a retail developer building something for a sports team, handing over, all looks nice, but then once it's handed over, the sports team did not have the skills to keep the CMS updated or anything along those lines. So I thought I would be in that space, sort of be an IT contractor, consultant. But getting started, I pretty much started by blogging and sort of giving out my opinion via sportsgeekhq.com.au at the time. And pretty much just giving my opinion on fan engagement, digital activations, how teams could use social media, those kind of things. And I did my first Sports Geek trip in January 2010. So yeah, over 4 years ago now. And so that trip entailed going to Los Angeles, Dallas, and New York. And it was part secret shopper, part investigation, part networking. I wanted to see what stadiums were doing. You can only assess so much from a digital point of view via your computer. You've got to get out there and meet people. So I think that was really important, the connecting with people, but also using all the platforms. And I guess my best story from a using all the platforms point of view sort of comes about. One of the goals of that trip was to try to meet Mark Cuban, and I'm still hoping now to meet him, or at least have him as a guest on the podcast. It's one of my new goals to have Mark Cuban as a guest on the podcast this year. But I tweeted Mark Cuban. I connected with people around the Mavericks organization. And I also connected with Brad Main, who was the CEO of the American Airlines Center at the time. So I was trying to set up that meeting. Eventually, Mark Cuban did email me back and say, sorry, I don't meet with people during the season. So I said, that's fine. I'll still go along. So I was at Dodger Stadium, getting a tour of the facilities and meeting some of the people at the Dodgers, when I got a tweet from Jill Dotz. And Jill tweeted me after I was tweeting about Dodger Stadium. She said, you'll have to come back to a game when there's baseball on. I said, I'd love to. Looking forward to going to a game at Dodger Stadium. And so we were tweeting backwards and forwards after this random connection via Twitter. And after doing that, we figured out that I was going to be in Dallas at the same time that Jill was going to be at Dallas, and we were both going to be at the Mavericks-Lakers game, where I'd hoped to meet Mark Cuban and catch up with Brad. So I went to the game. I tweeted Mark Cuban just in case he changed his mind. I also tweeted Brad because although we'd bounced emails backwards and forwards, we hadn't set up a time to meet up. So I pretty much just said, "Hey Brad, I'll be at your facility, looking forward to it." And so part of that, I'm sitting there at the game watching the Lakers with Kobe Bryant, and Phil Jackson was still coaching at that stage. And halfway through the second quarter, I hear my name. Now I'm traveling alone. I hear Sean, and I turn around, and there's Brad Main standing there and saying, "Hey, come up to the suite." And so it was really surprising. I wasn't expecting it. Now I was meant to meet up with Jill at halftime. But with I had suite tickets in my hand, I thought I will blame bad Wi-Fi, and I would go up to the suite. So I went up to the suite, and Brad was very kind. They said they've got some Fosters on ice, and I was very polite and said, "Thank you, Brad. I'll drink them all to be polite, but Australians don't drink Fosters." And then he introduced me to all the people in the suite, and as he was doing it, he goes, "Oh, and this is Jill." So Jill Dotz, who was tweeting with me only 2 days earlier, was in the suite with Brad, and was able to provide the final push to get me up to the suite. So just sort of shows you, and I guess the hustle that is needed to get into the sports industry. A little bit of luck, a little bit of right timing, but you've really got to use all the networks that you can. And so in that instance, and with that story, I used Twitter, LinkedIn. I'd already connected with Brad, Facebook, email. I'd used all the platforms that I could to get me to that position to allow that to happen. And I really think it's important, if you are looking to get into the industry, and especially if you're looking to get into the digital marketing and the digital content business and work on those digital teams with sports, is you've got to use all those platforms. So I think one advantage any newcomer, and I'm talking to graduates here, but any newcomer to the sports is can you bring something that the team doesn't have? And so there's still up and coming platforms and tools that that young people, and I hate saying it young people because it makes me sound older, that young people are using. So we're talking things like Snapchat and Tumblr and those kind of tools. They're using those tools natively and all the time. So if you can understand how to use them effectively, it might be worthwhile a team using those kind of tools via their interns or their young employees, because they've still got to have someone run them. It is a big commitment to take on another platform. But if you can come to them and say, "Yes, I've used Pinterest a lot. I understand the ins and outs. I understand how to post, when to post, how to tag it," they might be more willing to give you a go and also hand you the keys to run that as a project to show that it can work. So that's a long way and a long anecdote to answer a question how to break into sports business. It's how I did it. But for me, the main takeaway is to use all the platforms, especially use all the platforms that you are going to use when you're getting into a job. You can't come and say, "I want to work in digital, but I hate Facebook, I don't like using it." It's going to be part of your daily grind. You have to use it. You have to know it. It's much better to understand it on your time and on your personal platforms than make that mistake on a brand account. Okay, I'm going to keep this episode a little short. We'll have a quick break and we'll come back to wrap things up.
Need help with your content? Book in for a content brainstorming session with Sports Geek now. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/work.
Okay, that brings us to another end to another Sports Geek podcast. Again, apologies for this one being a little bit late. Even Sports Geek can have technical difficulties, but hopefully this will record and I'll be able to export it out of GarageBand okay, and it will be up and working. One other note, if you haven't given Beers, Blokes and Business podcast a listen, I'd suggest you do. I'm learning a lot from the blokes in doing the podcast. I'm getting some really great feedback. But for those who work in digital, the episode this week, episode 25, you can go to beersblokesbusiness.com/25, is on content marketing and the ability for businesses now to tell their story, and no more so than the sports business. You're all in the content marketing game. Yes, you are producing content and match reports, but in the end, it is all part of content marketing. And I did like Steve Sematino's final takeaway from it, that the marketing side doesn't matter. It is about the content. So producing great content is marketing in itself. So, okay, that noise tells me to dedicate this show and get out, do the social media post of the week. So this is episode 35. You can get the show notes at sportsgeekhq.com/35. A few available. One is Kevin Durant, who has absolutely been going bonkers in the NBA recently. Another one from the NBA from the 90s, Reggie Lewis, taken away from the NBA scene far too soon. But for my being a Collingwood supporter, and I know that'll get some people to tune out and turn off this podcast immediately, I'll have to give it to the Macedonian Marvel, Peter Dacos, and one of the first clients of Sports Geek, Peter Dacos. I'll leave a clip of Dakes' highlights in a YouTube clip in the show notes. Check them out. If you don't know what Australian football is, Dakes was one of the best at kicking that strangely shaped oval ball. This week's sound of the game and this week's social media post of the week are intrinsically linked. Very lucky that to have former guest on the show, Shane Harmon, CEO of Westpac Stadium over in Wellington. He sent me in some audio, and that's what you're hearing underneath me right now, from the Westpac, from the Wellington Phoenix 5-0 victory over the Melbourne Victory in the A-League. So, how have I linked the sounds of the game to the social media post of the week? Now, normally the social media post of the week, I try to focus on terrific implementation, smart and savvy tweets or posts by teams, and I try to steer clear of the silly mistakes. But this one, related to this game, for mine, just was pretty much as wrong as you can get from a social media post from a sports executive. Scott Munn is the CEO of the Melbourne Heart, and after his crosstown rivals, the Melbourne Victory, lost to the Wellington Phoenix 5-0, he decided to send a tweet to celebrity chef and well-known Victory fan, George Columbaris. Pretty much just rubbing the result in his face. I thought you would like this, sending him a screenshot of the game. Now, yes, that could have been playful banter, but really, knowing George, and I'm sure Scott may have known what type of response he would get. George came back hard, and it's effectively the same as a sports team owner having a go at Gordon Ramsay, and you would understand what you would expect to be getting back from him. And then it wasn't so much the first one. You could have written off the first one as light-hearted banter, but to come back and say in some cultures 5 is a lucky number. I just thought it was a misjudged tweet by Scott there. Really, for my advice, if you're looking for your executives to be on Twitter, or if you're tweeting as a representative of the team, you've got to really stick a hard and fast line of sticking to the team line and not bringing your team into disrepute or any damage. And if you look down the Twitter trail there, a lot of fans had their say of displeasure at what Scott was tweeting. So, as I said, don't normally focus on the negative side of Twitter, but that one was a talking point at SB Night, so I just thought I could not leave it there. That signal is the closing 2 cents. I'm going to use my experience from this week. If you're out there in the field trying to cover your sport or do a job, always have a backup plan. Have a secondary device, have second access to internet. Here I am producing this podcast on 3 computers. Always have a backup plan and always back up.
Please leave a review on iTunes. Go to sportsgeekhq.com/iTunes. Find all Sports Geek podcasts at sportsgeekhq.com/SGP. Want to maximize returns from your digital team? Contact Sports Geek about content and commercialization workshop. Thanks for listening to the Sports Geek Podcast.